Do you believe in God? When asked this question, and I've seen people on television that were asked, whether it be a politician or a movie star or perhaps some intellectual, and they ask, do you believe in God? Well, they'll give an answer that sounds like they're trying to plead the fifth, like they are on trial at times. You know, it's not that hard of a question. A yes or no answer would suffice. But it is always as if it were some sort of a philosophical meandering tap dance when they give the answer. And they will say things like, well, I am spiritual, but whether I believe in a supreme being or not, well, the answer is often, I do not. What is the basis of our beliefs as Christians? How can we explain the understanding that we have to the rest of the world? And how did we arrive at these conclusions that we call Christianity? Why can't we just simply follow the most recent theories in science and the explanation from the modern thinkers, the intelligent or the educated, the curators of knowledge, as they might be called? Between those who believe in God and those who hold the scientific explanation of our origin, there is a vast gorge, isn't it? A Grand Canyon of opposition, and they will never meet, as they say, ne'er the twain shall meet. How is it that believers share in this invisible force, this unseen trust, if you will, this intangible belief in God that others seem to miss? Where does it originate, and how is it so powerful as to reject the modern evidence of man's beginning and the beginning of all that we see and know, as scientists will tell us? You know, we live in an age that grew out of ancient Alexandria, Egypt, where places like Alexandria, Egypt, where the scientific method was put in place, where mathematical research became the basis for all knowledge. If you can't prove it in a laboratory, it doesn't exist. Man set out to prove through his own research the origin of life, and they have continued to this day. By taking this approach apart from God, they have arrived at a variety of theories, such as evolution and the possible origins of life, both of which they can neither prove nor do they agree upon. But those who believe in God have themselves the belief that God is the beginning. They start with God and proceed forward with the exact same evidence as the atheist. But this evidence in a Christian life only magnifies his knowledge of God, and more importantly, it solidifies an element missing from those who reject God, and that is faith. So I'd like to talk about faith today, and I hope you don't say, oh no, here goes another sermon about faith. But I'd like to look at the book of faith that was written, Hebrews the 11th chapter, and I want to really get the magnifying glass, the microscope out today and look at these verses and ask yourself the question, why did they give these examples of faith? We blow through the Hebrews 11th chapter many times and read these examples real quickly, but I'd like you to ask the question to yourself, why did he give these examples? I believe the writer of the book of Hebrews had something in mind that might be lying under the surface or between the lines, as you might say. Faith is not just, I lost my place on my notes here, I'm sorry. Faith is not just a single characteristic. You know, we might say that that's one of the Christian attributes is to have faith. I would like to unfold faith today and say that faith has a variety of aspects and a variety of elements, if you will. It has many elements, and we shall see as we shall read through these scriptures today that many of the writers and participants of the Bible spoke of faith, but each one of them had different elements of faith, I believe. The writer of the book of Hebrews, as they will term him, I believe that the Apostle Paul, if he didn't write it, certainly had a great hand in the writing of the book of Hebrews, summarized faith in one chapter, and I believe was trying with all of his might to express the various elements of faith. In verse 1, I should say, in chapter 11, it says, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. In my margin, it says it's the realization of the things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. I think those really tell more about faith than maybe the version that we have. Paul said, we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. People might ask you, what is faith? How can I have faith? And how do you believe in a God that you can't see and know exists, that you can't produce physically and prove in a laboratory? For by it the elders obtain a good report. In verse 3 it says, through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. The Christian, begins his faith with the realization that God is the creator of all things. I mean, that's where we begin. That's where the Word of God begins in the book of Genesis. It starts with the creation. When you look at light, when you look at the order in our universe, the symmetry, the color, the beauty, the earth, wow. I mean, there has not been an astronaut yet that hasn't gone to space and looked back and marveled at the beauty of this planet Earth. It is unlike any other planet out there. When you see the vast ecosystem from the rain, the weather, the seasons, the rotation of the earth, gravity, the distance that we live from the sun and how it affects the earth, the effects of the moon on the earth, all of these working together in harmony, it is really remarkable. It's absolutely a miracle when you look at those things. The vast number of species of plants, from the redwoods and the sequoias to the flowering meadows that we see across the plains, the fruit and nut trees, grains and vegetables. They say there's 391,000 species of plants out there. And what are they for? What do we use them for? Well, they're all most of them are flowering. Like 94% of them are flowering plants. We use them for medicine, for food, for clothing, for building materials. They produce oxygen that we breathe, and they even affect weather patterns. Why is it that most of these plants produce flowers? You sort of see some symmetry throughout the creation of the plant kingdom, as they call it. And then you go to the animal kingdom, from elephants to horned toads, to rabbits and pelicans, ants and butterflies, a walrus to a penguin. Who doesn't love to see a penguin walking across the snow? To the blue whales, maybe an orangutan or a kangaroo. What a fun variety of animals there are out there. I love to go to the zoos and look at these strange animals, and some of these programs I watch on television that will really just absolutely fascinate me. I watched one here the other day, and it was showing these schools of, what was it? Salmon? No, it wasn't salmon. It was in the ocean. They were sardines. These millions upon millions of sardines traveling together, and they're forced by the circulation or the migration of the waters of the oceans. The cooler waters begin to push these sardines up the coast of these countries, and 5,000 dolphins corralled all of these sardines, and they began to feed. Well, as a result of that, these other creatures of the deep come to feed on this largest gathering that you can imagine of like a cloud, a black cloud of these sardines by their hundreds of millions. And what fascinates me is they're all swimming and they turn at the same instant. How do they know to do that? What signal do they give that 100,000 of them can turn exactly at the same time? The other day I was standing out on an oil field and I told one of the guys, look at that. This cold weather is blowing through here and these blackbirds are coming down. I saw the exact same image. A great big ball of black smoke looked like these blackbirds taking off, and then instantly they all turned at exactly the same second. Man can't do that. 10 of us can't hardly march together without fumbling over one another. And here I see this symmetry, this pattern. I never fail to give the example of a zebra. To me, looks like if you took a thumbprint and placed it on a black sheet of paper. Is that not the markings of a zebra? And why do bats have 2 nostrils, but so do rabbits, and so do eagles, and so do bears? Why is it they all have 2 nostrils or 2 ears? You can look at a fish, and a fish even has 2 nostrils. I mean, it is absolutely fascinating to me when you look at mammals. Why is it that all birds lay eggs? Out of all the birds there are, if evolution is real, why didn't they evolve into all arrays of different kinds of ways to reproduce, but every one of them produce eggs? Why don't the scientists look at this evidence that is just glaring in their faces of what we see in nature, taken from the perspective that there is a great creator God who created all things, instead of going the other way and starting from here and trying to look in space back to the beginning of time and prove that it all came as an explosion out in space, the Big Bang Theory as they call it. In Romans, the 1st chapter, it says, "For the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." What kind of power does it take to hold a galaxy in place? And why aren't these galaxies banging into one another out here in space? But no, we see order. And later on in that chapter in the book of Romans, it says, they professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. So we see this first element here that this book of Hebrews tells us, that our faith depends upon belief that God is the creator of the universe and the sustainer. Next we come to verse 4. It says, faith is, by faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gift, and by it he being dead yet speaks. So the writer is looking back. He sees this example of Abel's sacrifice that God accepted. And you remember the story, how God said, I accept his sacrifice of the animal, but Cain's sacrifice I don't accept, because he brought, the vegetable basket with him. Faith, I believe the element of faith that he's trying to portray here is the inward realization that we have. Faith is something that is truly within our hearts. We cannot know what's going on inside of the lives of other human beings. We look at someone and we judge them by their appearance, by their looks, by their actions, maybe some of the things that they do. But we cannot know the inner struggles that other people face, their desperate cries at times that they have, their yearnings, their deep emotional prayers that they might have prayed. You don't know whether somebody is crying out to God to help them with a bad habit or with this obstacle they're facing or something that's going on in their life. But we judge immediately upon the surface, don't we? All of these are deep within the heart of man, these things that I'm describing here as faith. Things such as honesty and courage and generosity, all are motivated by the inward heart of man. You know, someone who gives you a gift, they either do it out of the sincerity of their heart, or they do it superficially as a bribe, don't they? One or the two. What I'm describing here is what exists in the very heart intents of a man or a woman. When you have bravery, either you are brave or you're courageous or you're not. Either you have just generosity in your heart or you don't. It is one of the two. You know, when Samuel was looking to crown the next king of Israel, he rejected all of the sons of Jesse. He said, God doesn't look on the outward appearance of a man, but God looks down at the inward heart of a man, and so they selected the least likely David to be king in Israel. Jesus, I believe, did this when he was selecting his disciples. For I don't believe if he'd have been looking on the outward appearance, he would have looked at those 12. But he looked into the heart, and he knew that they had this great potential and that they would be great disciples. Jesus also was the only one that noticed the widow's mite, wasn't he? While all the other people were looking at all these grand gifts and offerings that were being given in the temple, Jesus noted the heart, the very inner motives of this lowly widow who only gave 2 mites. I think that our religious observance might be the same way. It might not be in great big giant cathedrals with tens of thousands of people that are in attendance, that God might not look down upon the heart of human beings who are very lowly, who have very humble upbringing, who maybe meet in small groups, and he does not accept that more than he would all this grandiose portrayal of religion. So I believe that faith is something that is very inward and proceeds out of the very heart of man, his intentions. We have to have that kind of faith that places confidence in God and resides in the depths of our heart, and it is completely invisible, isn't it? You can't put your finger on it. People don't understand, why do you have this faith in God? They cannot see where it comes from. The third element down in verse 5, he says, by faith Enoch was translated so that he should not see death, and was not found because he translated him, but before his translation he had this testimony that pleased God. Now we understand in this verse here that some will say that he was translated to heaven, that he went to heaven. We understand that it is given to all men once to die, as the Bible tells us, and then after this, the resurrection. That Enoch, more likely because there were those that were seeking to actually kill him, was translated to a place where he was safe. And it said that, that there was correspondence from him later on in history. But that he eventually did die, like Jesus, or like the Apostle Peter said on the day of Pentecost, that no man has ascended to heaven, that even David, your king, his sepulcher is with us today. We understand that he probably did die. But the purpose of this is to portray or to depict an element of faith that Enoch had. And let's see what it was. For without faith it is impossible to please him. For he that comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is the rewarder of them that diligently seek him. So in this verse here, we find this element of faith that Enoch believed that God exists, number one, and that he rewards those that seek him. Most people pray expecting nothing. I shouldn't say most people. I hope that all of you in this room do pray and expect to God hears your prayers. Many come to church and don't expect anything. But how is that even possible? You know, when you look into the Word of God, it shines like a glaring spotlight into the heart and the minds of men and women. And it certainly can lay aside all the fears that you might possess from the world outside. All the fears that you have. It also points to us a way of life. We believe that this is like a roadmap to the to our lives. It's like a handbook that shows us the way to go. The right course, the right path, the solid ground, as David said, to stand on. Through it, the weak are made strong. Through it, we overcome huge obstacles. We find out how we can overcome huge obstacles. We rekindle love that is lost, perhaps. Our hopes are reawakened or awakened for the very first time. Jesus told the two blind men, you remember they came to him and they said, Son of David, heal us. And he laid his hands on him and said, according to your faith, be it done unto you. And of course, they were both healed because they recognized him as being the Messiah. We have to have that kind of faith that God will perform these type of things for us. And I believe that if we have that kind of faith, it is pleasing to God, as it was with Enoch. God was pleased with the faith that Enoch had, that he believed that he was God and that he would protect him in that time. In verse 7, it tells us, by faith Noah, being warned of God that things not seen as yet, moved with fear and prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by the which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is by faith. We must have the faith that actually condemns the actions of the world outside. Faith conforms to no fixed pattern. As I said, we're looking here at different people down through history that expressed their faith in various ways depending on what happened to them, their experiences. To one, it was a sacrifice, as we saw here in Abel's life. To another, it's building an ark in the case of Noah. And we'll see that others, they were scattered and traveled through strange lands, and one even renounced his own royal heritage. But to Noah, this meant the very rugged patience that he would have to have. The careful construction of this ark, which seemed at the time to others like pure folly. Here a man builds an ark a long ways from any source of water, and I would imagine this clumsy looking vessel that began to tower into the sky was the joke of the day of his countrymen, wouldn't you say? Look at that idiot out there building that ark out in the middle of the desert. But Noah had this quiet confidence in the deliverance of and his salvation that came from God. By condemning the present evil world, he had faith that God would save not only him, but his family also. And it tells us that he was became the heir of righteousness, which is by faith. Every one of us can trace our heritage back to Noah, can't we? So we see that by condemning this present evil world, he had the faith that God would save. And I believe that this element of faith is certainly necessary today. In the world we live in, the political climate, but also the fear that you might have of what's going to happen in the future. There are a lot of people out there afraid of what's going to happen in the future, and I could get up here and probably scare you half to death about reading some of these scriptures out of Revelation or Daniel, or what's going to happen to the nation of Israel. But know this, that God protected Noah and his family because he had the faith that God would. And we need to have that element of faith in our life, that God's going to protect us and our families in those same situations. Down in verse 8 it says, by faith Abraham, when he had called to go out into the place which he should have received for the inheritance, obeyed, and he went out not knowing whither he went. You know, we read through that real quickly. We can stand at a great distance from the story of Abraham and said, you know, God told him, you go to this country, and it says Abraham obeyed, and he went. What a great quality. But think about it. Here a man was living in a city that was full of culture, probably had a job that paid him a lot of money. He was set. He didn't have to go anywhere. He wasn't in need of anything. And God, just put yourself in his place. What if God said today for you, I want you to just do away with your job, your house, and everything, all your belongings, pack a knapsack, and I want you to go to Central Mongolia. Now, how would you feel? You go to a country where you can't speak the language. You're out of your element. You're away from any of your kinsmen. The security you have, all the trust that you place in your future today by your surroundings, your house. You know, we say, you know, in 5 years I'm going to get this done, and in 15 years I'm going to have the house paid for, and the college loans will be paid off, and you know I'm going to build this barn or this shop over here, and I'm going to buy another car, and I've got my retirement set over here, and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. But here God asked Abraham to step out on faith and go somewhere he didn't even know where he was going to go. I think there's an element of faith there that we have to have as well. Maybe someday God will ask us to go somewhere we don't know where we're going to go. But we have to know that we can trust Him. Faith in the God of the future. It says down in verse 9, by faith he sojourned in the land of promise and in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs of him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. He wasn't looking for a physical place. He was looking for the place God wanted him to be. To renounce all of these things that we have, I wrote here in my notes, is to begin, for someone who doesn't have faith, I guess if you put it in today's terminology or in your life today, would be to renounce all of those things that you find secure and to begin keeping the Sabbath day and the Ten Commandments and jettisoning the pagan holidays like Christmas and Easter and Halloween, and just begin to start keeping God's holy days. And what that might mean to someone who all of their lives, a man told me this week, he came into my office, sat down and said, are you going to have a Merry Christmas this year? And I said, well, to tell you the truth, I don't celebrate Christmas. I never have my whole life. But I said, you know what? This time of the year brings out some of the best qualities in human beings in the act of giving and sharing with families and having love for one another. And I think those are outstanding qualities. I said, I just wish that they had these qualities the other 364 days of the year. So I hope I gave him a good answer, and I hope maybe he'll think, wonder why they don't keep Christmas. And another lady came to me and said, we went to the office Christmas party at a restaurant, you know. And so it was just a meal, and all of your wives are invited and husbands. And so we went to this dinner, and it was at the, I got to think of the name of this because it's really the point of the story. It was called the Purple Pig or something like that, you know, the Tuscan Pig. That was the name of it. It was an Italian restaurant, and everything they cooked practically had pork in it. And so they started bringing out these dishes, and I said, I'll take a salad, you know, I'll eat a little bit of the salad, and these hors d'oeuvres over here, maybe, you know, they're just vegetables and cheese. And anyway, I asked the cook, he came out, and I said, can you cook me something that's just some noodles and maybe some sauce or something, tomato sauce? Oh yeah, no problem. The lady that put the party on overheard that. She came over and said, what's the matter? And I said, I don't eat pork. You don't eat pork? Why? And I said, well, for religious purposes, we observe the the food dietary laws that are in God's Word. Oh. And this strange look comes over their face, you know. It's like they've never heard this before. Anyway, I think when a person steps out on faith and they begin to obey these laws of God and keep God's holy day calendar and observe the laws and the days that He wants us to keep, and to let Jesus Christ be the lead in their life. And they start exemplifying love instead of hatred. And they start telling the truth instead of lying. That their life begins to follow His example. They begin to understand about God's kingdom, that it's not off somewhere in the nether heavens, but it's actually coming here down to this earth. All of those to us may seem very commonplace and natural. But to an outsider, it's as like they have to leave here and move to Central Mongolia. It's a big step for them. And they have to exercise faith when they do that. I hope that we as God's people recognize the difficulty that might be for some people. And that we gently lead people to the truth of God by our example, by our kindness, by our words. And if they say Merry Christmas to you, you don't have to say, oh, we don't keep that a pagan holiday. But that you might, with tenderness, say, well, I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you very much. And, as I said, maybe you could use a different tactic than we don't keep that pagan abomination. How farther are they going to go with you if you say that to them? They're going to slam the door in your face. But you might be able, with tenderness and with the love that Jesus Christ had for sinners, for people that don't know the truth, that are completely blinded, to set this wonderful example to lead them. And that's a huge step. I think that's a huge aspect of faith that we have to have. In verse 11, I got to get finished here. I'm going to run way too long. As he did in the book of Hebrews here, he goes in the very end of this chapter here. It's almost as if he's running out of time. Let's look here down in verse 11. Through faith also Sarah herself received strength and conceived seed and was delivered of the child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. I call this the person that might have been a little bit skeptical. The faith, we have to have the faith of God, even though we might have one point in our lives been skeptical. Remember, Sarah laughed when they said, you're going to have a child. She's 99 years old. She laughed. I wrote in my notes here, some people laugh when you tell them that you were meant to be a son of God, a daughter of God. But you're kidding me. That's hilarious. Some laugh when you tell them that you can know the meaning of life, why you were put here on this earth. The Word of God answers the problems that we have in our life. If you'll just read it, it'll tell you how to conduct your life and how to solve these huge problems. You can find truth, you can find peace, you can find contentment. And that doesn't come with money or possessions, but from faith in Almighty God. And as I said, sometimes people laugh at that. It's almost a joke. In chapter 11, chapter 11 down in verse 13, let's finish reading verse 12. Therefore sprang there one of him as good as dead. Remember, Abraham was going to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. He was as good as dead. So many as the stars of the sky, in multitude, in the sand which is by the seashore, innumerable. So his seed went on to propagate the whole earth. No telling how many there will ultimately be recorded as the offspring of Isaac, therefore Jacob, and the promises that God made. Down in verse 13, these all died in faith, not having received the promise, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. I want to read to you here. This is the Interpreter's Bible, Volume 11, on several of the books of the Bible, including the book of Hebrews. In the book of Hebrews, I want to read what this man wrote, J. Harry Cotton, who was in a writer of the Bible, or a commentary of the Bible, probably before 1900. I want to read what he wrote here about man's incompleteness and God's faithfulness, making the comparison here. He said, "These all died in faith, not having received what was promised. This is the riddle of the world, the enigma of faith, of our faith. The world's religions and the best literature of the world are full of incompleteness of human life. It is not merely that we cling to life in the presence of death, that we long for a few more years. Ask anyone who is great of age. They don't want to die. They don't want to give up. They want to go on. They want to see another day. There may be nothing noble or noteworthy in this eagerness for more life, but all for which we strive, all that gives meaning or nobility to our days, all is tragically incomplete. Some clue to the world's mysteries intrigues us, and we set out upon a quest of knowledge. As I was telling you, these educators and people that are in the know, they set out on this quest to gather all the knowledge they can. After a life's devotion, the work is only beginning, as my dad would tell you before he passed away. We listen to the high call of duty, and no matter how scrupulous and sincere our moral growth, it calls for a more beyond death. We think that there has to be more after death. As Kant saw, the moral imperative is so high that only partial fulfillments are possible in this life. But if this life is all that is allowed us, the validity of that imperative is destroyed. We agonize, now let's see if you do this, over the meaning of suffering. We see some who by faith turn the black shadows of pain into patterns of strength and victory. They're both extremes, both swings of the pendulum. But the compensations are never complete. The suffering of the just is itself a denial of justice in our world. My heart goes out when I see people suffering. Love's adventure is never complete in this life. There is so much more to know about each other and so much more to do together. The death brings upon love a scoffing ridicule. Faith never receives what was promised. That's what we read here. They didn't receive the promises that were given to them. It calls for much more. And if the much more is denied, faith is reduced to an obscurity. Victor Hugo could say to a friend at the age of 70, "For half a century, I have been outpouring my volumes of thought in prose and in verse, in history, philosophy, drama, romance, ode, and ballad, and yet I appear to myself not to have said 1,000th part of what is within me. And when I am laid in the tomb, I shall not reckon that my life is finished." I feel that way. I recognize that there are even pastors and ministers out there that spend all of their life preaching, and they set out on a course as young ministers. They had goals. They had the idea that they were going to conquer the world and they were going to bring thousands into the faith. And yet year after year after year, life wanes. Life begins to wear on you. And you realize all of these aspirations that you had are going to come to almost nothing. No results. It's very frustrating. And yet, I see and read in these men, even these examples we have here in the book of Hebrews, that it wasn't finished. They didn't receive the promises that God had made to them, but they held on to that vision. They lifted their eyes beyond their own surroundings and looked to the horizon. It says, he continues here, just another sentence or two, he speaks of every man of faith. They never received what was promised. But then the coin is turned. He said, but it is God who promises. And that, my friends, changes everything. I love that. God is the one who made the promises. That changes everything. The promises of God can cause us to, like I said, to lift our eyes out of our own circumstances beyond our time, and to believe that God, and to believe in God is to trust Him to keep all of those many promises that He's made. So faith is the linking of human incompleteness to the faithfulness of God. That's what faith is about. In chapter 11, down at verse 14, it says, for they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. This is not our homeland. This is not our kingdom yet. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from which they came out, they might have opportunity to return. But to go back to that country for Abraham would have meant to reject God. Even though the security and everything was back there, he would have had to have turned his back on God if he went back. But now they desire a better country, that is a heavenly, wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He hath prepared for them a city. And we read about the New Jerusalem in the book of Revelation. Skipping down to verse 23, by faith Moses, when he was born, hid 3 months of his parents because they saw he was a proper child, and that they were not afraid of the king's commandment that ordered them on pain of death if they didn't throw their child into the Nile River, that they would be killed. By faith Moses, when he was come of years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He rejected, as I said earlier, his royal heritage. Would have given him a lifetime of pleasure, a lifetime of prosperity, the riches beyond his wildest imagination, and yet he rejected it all, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. I mean, better than if you discovered Tutankhamun's tomb and you had all that gold piled up here and the fame and the fortune that went along with it. For he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. For by faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured, as seeing him who is invisible, as I said. You can't grab a hold of it here, but it is in your heart, it is in your mind, it is in your hopes and dreams and aspirations. Through faith he kept the Passover. How about that? And the sprinkling of the blood, that lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea, and as by dry land which the Egyptians essay to do, were drowned. God drowned all of their enemies. Down in verse 32, and what shall I say more? As I said, it almost appears as if this writer in the book of Hebrews, like me, is running out of time. Shall I talk of Gideon or Barak or Samson or Jephthah or David or Samuel and of the prophets? I forgot to mention all of those guys and what they endured, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, returned the flight of armies of the aliens. Remember the days of Hezekiah when the Assyrians were surrounding the city. Women received their dead raised to life. Remember the case of Elijah where he raised that widowed lady's son back to life. And others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others had trials of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover, of bonds and imprisonment. Paul, the apostle. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented. Sound familiar? Anybody? Of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and dens and caves of the earth, and all these, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise. God having provided some better thing for us, that they, without us, should not be made perfect. So perfection requires faith. And they had it, and you have it. But God is not going to make us perfect until we all come to that place. And so we close with chapter 12 and verse 1. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down on the right hand of the throne of God. Faith, as I hope to portray here, has many aspects and elements. Life may bring out in you one of, or a variety perhaps, of these elements in your life. We must patiently hold to our faith in God and do the things that please Him, including having faith, for we understand that He is our Creator and our Sustainer and our Provider and our ultimate deliverer from this present evil world. So we look to the future that oftentimes seems so far away, and yet it's closer than we might think. Hold dear to these examples of faith, and to those I believe that will be included on the end of this list, who recently expressed their willingness to remain faithful even to the very end.